And now let's go to our panel session. Let's present our amazing lineup of speakers who are joining us today to discuss about the Conference on the Future of Europe, the role that policymakers, researchers, but also members of the civil society organizations might have in the Conference on the Future of Europe. And for that, we're going to be joined by Vilma Delizem Bantongerlo, who is the mayor of Pil en Mas, a municipality of 4 towns in the north of the Dutch province of Limburg with 43,000 inhabitants. Delizem has extensive experience as a political representative on local, regional, and European level. In addition to her work as a mayor, she is also a member of the European Committee of the Regions, where she has a seat in the Civics Commission on, among other things, active citizenship. Delizem is also a member of the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe. As a co-rapporteur, she has prepared recently a report on the interaction between urban and rural areas. Very much looking forward to talking to you today, Vilma. Welcome, Nicolo Milanese. Nicolo Milanese is the founding director of European Alternatives, a civil society organization which promotes democracy, equality, and culture beyond the nation state. With Lorenzo Marsili, Milanese is the author of Citizens of Nowhere, How to Save European from Itself. His later report for LSE Ideas, The Rise of Insurgent Europeanism, explores the priorities and initiatives of civil society movements in Europe and how they are interacting with politics. Very much looking forward to talk to you about all those ideas and books that you've written, Nicolo. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Alvaro Olead. He's a postdoctoral research at Studio Europa Maastricht and the Department of Political Science of the Maastricht University. He published the book Framing TTAP in the European Public Spheres towards an empowering dissensus for European integration. Previously, Olead was affiliated with the research project Reconnect, Reconciling Europe with its citizens through democracy and the rule of law, a project of Horizon 2020. Now, welcome you all. Thank you so much for joining us today and for being part of this conversation. And we know that the question of the European democratic deficit has been there for a very long time. It's not new at all. We saw it with the failure of the referendum of the Maastricht Treaty years ago. We have seen over the past few years also with that European constitution that never came to be. So this is something that has been there for quite some time, but definitely a conversation that is coming back. And one of the ways in which this democratic deficit is being addressed is by launching this conference on the future of Europe. And I was wondering, maybe this question is for Alvaro first. Why do you think the institutions are trying to launch the conference, and when do you think they became aware of this democratic deficit and decided to address it?
Thanks a lot, Beatriz, for the great introduction. Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think for already 30 years, basically around the Maastricht Treaty, there was a sense that European integration was going very far and that it could not be led uniquely by national governments. So already during the 90s, there was an emergent discourse in new institutions surrounding civil society and the participation of civil society. That followed as well afterwards to the European Constitutional Treaty and the Convention. And ever since then, there was a sense that the legitimation of European integration required more than the approval of national governments. So it's been there for a long time. And I think that especially during the last decade that has seen the Eurozone crisis, and several emergent movements that had at its core Europe, for good or for bad. We can see in the case of the UK and Brexit that where Euroscepticism was very clear. And I think that EU institutions are aware that it required a response. And this response has been, for now, the Conference on the Future of Europe, which I think, we have to see what's going to become and how inclusive will it be and what its outcome may be. But I think for now, I think it's excellent that we're having this conversation to try to push as much as possible for the conference to be successful and for engaging as many people as possible.
Thank you so much for Alvaro. I will have a follow-up question about the question of how can actually the Conference on the Future of Europe help to address that democratic deficit. But I was wondering, because you mentioned the question of Brexit, sometimes actually ensuring participative democracy might lead to results that are unexpected or that are not necessarily what politicians would hope for. How did you feel about this? Are you concerned about the potential outcome of the Conference on the Future of Europe and the potential consequences for European integration?
Well, I think the case of Brexit is an interesting one because it was a referendum where there was quite little deliberation. So the Conference on the Future of Europe is really a different type of exercise in which it is prioritizing deliberation over aggregation. So it's like the citizens' assemblies that are taking place. It's going to be a relatively small amount of people and privileging deliberation, and it's not necessarily even going to lead to a concrete outcome. So I think it's a bit of a different exercise, and I'm not against referendums, but definitely referendums also require a previous public deliberation surrounding the results and the potential consequences that those votes may have. So I think what I missed in the case of Brexit was a real public debate about the consequences of Brexit, and also that it was a uniquely British thing, rather than involving as well people from all member states, because Brexit ultimately also affected the rest of European citizens beyond the UK.
Absolutely. And I think it's very interesting what you mentioned, because maybe out of the Conference on the Future of Europe, we see a referendum coming up on concrete initiatives, but this time might be better because there will be indeed a discussion previously to that referendum. Thank you so much, Alvaro. I would like to ask now, Nicolo, you as a member of the civil society, when do you think that organizations working around European integration realize about these democratic deficit, and whether you think the institutions actually are seriously considering this issue and addressing it?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for the invitation as well. As you can see, I'm I'm outside. You can probably hear the crickets, and I'm in the shade. So apologies for this. I'm in Athens today. It's not ideal for us for a Zoom call. Well, maybe it's ideal for me. It's less ideal for you watching me. Okay, so to answer your question, look, I think first off, the European Union has democratic deficit, but we shouldn't think that everything's fine with every other level of democracy, right? Look at Italy, where there's a technocratic government holding out a neo-fascist party, which is leading in the opinion polls. Look at France, where I live, usually, where the local and regional elections just last week had record low participation, because surely in part because of a highly centralized presidential system. These kinds of democratic innovations that are now being experimented with the Conference on the Future of Europe, citizens panels, citizens assemblies, and so on, they've been tried at national levels or at regional levels. Look at Ireland, look at Belgium. There's a reason for that. It's because they had some difficulties dealing with democratic questions. So it's not like the democratic deficit is a uniquely European Union level problem, right? What I think has changed in the past decade of crisis is that civil society organizations, citizens right across Europe have realized that decisions which are taken at a European scale have direct implications on their lives. I'm sitting in Athens. It couldn't be more obvious to the people of Athens that what happens, in more or less dark rooms in the corridors of power has a direct impact on their lives. And so civil society has mobilized around that. And so the shape of civil society in Europe has changed. It's no longer some specialized NGOs working on European affairs and then localized NGOs working on other issues. Everybody has to integrate to some extent European affairs into their thoughts and actions. The difficulty is, how do you do that? It's very difficult to talk with citizens about how you're going to influence European decision-making and institutions. I think that we can see that the Conference on the Future of Europe is also something remarkable. We're going to talk about, no doubt, criticisms of it, but there's something remarkable that in the middle of a pandemic, the European institutions somehow managed to put together a process which has got all kinds of difficulties, but is somehow about centering on citizens. You can either see that as a state of desperation or as a final appreciation that European integration has gone further and further and further this last decade, forced by world events. And at some point, you have to include the citizens in that. The question we're going to talk about, I think, through this conversation is if you can match up the new Europeanized local civil society, what we in the report you refer to call insurgent Europeanism, with an awareness at the institutions that just carrying on with the same mechanisms is not really going to be sufficient in the future. Can we bring these two things together?
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, because you've been mentioning the question of the engagement of local and regional and national civil society organizations. My impression is that over the past few years, especially when it comes to issues such as climate change, we have seen a way more active civil society at all different levels, and also with more power to influence, because we have seen actually a push for legislation at European level that we haven't seen before. And it was not about voting in elections only, it was also about taking the streets, organizing movements, organizing different ways of contribution to the political discussions. I was wondering whether you think that actually we are way better in terms of citizens' participation in European politics now, not only through institutionalized conference such as this Conference of the Future of Europe, but more generally because people are more aware of their impact on European politics.
It's really difficult to say. I mean, I think one of the things is that the problems are now so obvious, and they obviously have to be dealt with at a level beyond the local level. I'm in Athens. It's 40 degrees here. It's not as bad in the east as in the east of the United States, in the west of the United States. Sorry, but it's still pretty clear that it's unusually warm, and probably you have to do something about that. So the scale of the problems has grown larger, and there's a kind of civic response from the youth, but also from other parts of the society. But it's always too early to say whether it's really had an impact on European decision making. Has Fridays for Futures had an impact on European decision making, or has it been co-opted by the Commission to justify a Green Deal, which may be problematic in other ways? Part of the lesson of democratic engagement is that the story is never over, and it requires continuous engagement. I'm a little bit hesitant to make kind of flattering comparisons for our generation when I think of what previous generations achieved prior to '89 and earlier on. I'm not sure that we're so, the young people today are so much better, but they have a different set of problems to confront. They're finding new ways of dealing with them, and I think that the big story, two big stories of the past decade are that the European Union can't continue with its normal modus operandi, and that citizens are not going to allow it to. They're going to be engaged in European affairs in every kind of way that they can be, and so they're going to put themselves in a position where they can't be ignored.
Absolutely. I want to ask you one more question, but I'm going to jump first to Vilma for a follow-up on what the role actually of local and regional governments, and how are they engaging with European citizens to address those democratic deficits that we have seen over the past few years?
Well, thank you for introducing me, and I'm a little bit jealous. I'm in my office and not in Athens, but in summer I will be there. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm going back a little bit in the history, but since 1994, regional and local authorities are represented in the EU advisory body called a Committee of the Regions. And since then, the importance of European priorities and legislation has grown as a local and regional level, 1994. And as local and regional authorities are implementing legislation, it has become more and more important that they are involved in policy development and sharing good examples on how EU policy in practice works. And if you don't mind, I told you I'm a member of the Council of Europe also, a full member, and I hope you don't mind that I take the opportunity to underline the importance of the Council of Europe in this discussion. We forget it. The Council of Europe was founded in 1949, founded in the wake of World War II to uphold human rights, democracy, and the rule of law in Europe. And it started with a few European countries, and nowadays it has 47 member states of which 27 countries are member of the EU. And the Council of Europe is the continent's leading human rights organization seated in Strasbourg. And sorry for that introduction, but it's very important to take this, this part with us in the discussion of the future of Europe. Don't forget that. And as a mayor, the European Union is a little part of my daily work. And I actually heard about the process leading to the conference on the future of Europe through my role in my network with the Committee of the Regions as a member of the CIVEX Commission. And this is the Commission for Citizenship, Governance, Institutional and External Affairs. And under this umbrella, it also deals with active citizenship. And at the end of May, I had a digital meeting with my colleagues of the Renew delegation and Mr. Guy Verhofstadt as the leading chair of the conference. And I fully agree with him that the conference is necessary to put pressure on the EU and prepare it for the future. And that's we all have to stand for a good Europe and to talk with the citizens and not only with the institutions. And that's my beginning point in this discussion.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, you as a local representative, while at the same time being involved at European level on the European Committee of the Regions, how are you trying to bring together both dimensions, right? The local action, but also the European decision making. How did you try to engage with citizens to make sure that you join both sides of the story?
Yeah. Well, I'm only just a small part, but I think it's clear to need bridge the gap between the EU policymaking and the policymakers and the European citizens as a subject of these policies. The conference is a good start to start bringing these two very different worlds together. It's very difficult. And I say it's a good start because policymakers and politicians are now aware of the fact that the gap between the two worlds need to be closed. Looking at European citizens, I think it's also fair to say that citizen awareness on the EU needs to grow. A world to win, I think, in fact, on both sides. And I believe we will only be able to address the major social challenges before us if we work together. And it's about our common future and the people, the EU citizens are the ones who have to do the job. That's why I think it's so important to hear their views and to listen, absorb, rethink, and reformulate policies for a better future, clean and safe. We need them all for a better Europe.
This is very strong words. But I was wondering, how do you see the conference on the future of Europe? Do you think it's overly ambitious? Do you feel that it might actually establish a link between Brussels and the European citizens? Or do you think there's still a lot of challenges that we're going to be facing over the next few months? And we cannot say yet, as a word, most of our participants were saying a little bit before in a poll, whether this is actually leading to something concrete or not.
Well,
Yeah,
sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm a little bit optimistic, but I don't believe that there is a lot of interaction on the setting up of the conference between The Hague and the regions, for example. It seems to be challenging to involve local and regional stakeholders in national positions, at least on this topic. And let's be frank, I'm glad the initiative of organized Conference of Europe has been taken. So we all are part of it to bring something in it together with all the citizens and my inhabitants in my small town.
A role to play. So yeah, Alvaro, how do you feel about the Conference on the Future of Europe? Do you think it's too ambitious, or do you feel that it can actually lead to real change?
Well, I don't think the conference itself will lead to real change directly. I think that what we can aspire the conference to be is to encourage the bridging of national and regional policy questions with European ones. And I think here in the sense, following a bit what Nicolo said earlier, that the problems that we're facing are no longer, are clearly not can't be addressed only through the national level or even the regional level. And I'm thinking, for example, the case of Paris in the middle of the pandemic, making more bicycle lanes, and that goes very much in line with addressing climate change. And here I think we can see how there is a connection between regional issues with national issues with European. So what we can aspire the conference to be is to encourage more transnational politics, more transnational coalition making. So I think one of the things that have been problematic so far is that most important European decisions, for example, I think of the Next Generation EU, which is in many ways a great thing, the recovery fund post-COVID, yet it was a purely intergovernmental agreement that was led by the Council and in which the European Parliament had very little to say, and the national parliaments almost no say until the end when they have to approve it. So what we can aspire the conference to be is to push institutions to facilitate transnational coalition making, in which it's not the frugal four against the southern countries, but more that we can see coalitions between cities that are pushing for a particular type of green policy, or between political parties across different countries, and that the terms of the debate change between France versus Germany, the Scandinavians against the Southerners, and rather that it's between different visions of Europe that are not necessarily geographical blocks, but rather political ideas that are driving these confrontations.
Absolutely. You touched upon an issue that I think is very important, and is the fact that many European politics need a local dimension, right? Because even when it comes to climate policy, for instance, waste management, the design of transport, the urban areas, all that is actually designed at local, regional level. So definitely there needs to be a link. And I was wondering, Vima, how do you see the Conference on the Future of Europe as an opportunity to make sure that they strengthen the local aspect of European policies?
Well, in my daily work, I already told, as mayor, I'm close in contact with all my citizens. And I think a local government is the eyes and ears in a specific region, and therefore aware of the strengths and weakness in that region. We are the first to see if certain policy is not working. And together with citizens, businesses, and educational institutions, we can formulate alternatives based on experience. And the question, in fact, is how to share the practical examples. I think that's a big challenge for us all. We are the best ways to organize this, and I hope we will formulate and implement recommendations on this on the course of the Conference Future of Europe. We do have good examples or best practices, but we also need more attention for the importance of Europe. Let me share with you an example of my own practice. Most employees dealing with big themes such as climate adoption or energy transition don't know the precise content of the Green Deal and have no clue about the existence of the Conference of Europe. And as a normal citizen, how should I know? In other words, I plead for more accessible information on EU-related items for the public. We need to find the right channels, as the beautiful and content-rich websites of the EU institutions only serve a small group of interested and educated EU citizens. We need to mind that gap too. And I think it's my, I feel that I have been a part of this discussion to tell in Europe what my citizens think in my municipality. And if we all do that, I think we have a lot of input from our own citizens, and then they go to believe in the strengths of Europe.
Absolutely. Local representatives as the one that are closer to the citizens, and therefore they're much more aware of their own and daily life problems, and therefore they can bring that into the European conversation, which is one of the goals of the Conference on the Future of Europe. And one of the goals of today's discussion, we're trying to find out how to make sure that that actually happens. I also feel a little bit responsible about the question of communication, being a new journalist myself, and I understand that I have to play a role indeed in bringing citizens together into that conversation. Indeed, I wanted to get back to Nicolo about this question of trying to engage with citizens, because I know that you have been very much involved in shaping the Conference on the Future of Europe through a coalition of civil society organizations called Citizens Take Over Europe. And I was wondering, what kind of work are you doing in that area, and how has it been trying to join forces with other civil society organizations in trying to touch citizens across Europe?
Thanks. So I don't know how much we've been involved in actually shaping the Conference on the Future of Europe. We, as European Alternatives, with 50, now 70 civil society organizations, started already more than a year ago to come together to discuss how we felt this Conference on the Future of Europe should work, for two reasons. One reason was that these organizations from across the European Union have been working for years on the future of Europe. That's somehow our territory. So we felt like we need to put a marker in the ground and say, you can't really go around us. And secondly, that amongst many of the organizations, there's all kinds of specialists in the practice of doing more participative and deliberative democracy. And so we came up with 10 principles for what would be a genuinely participative Conference on the Future of Europe, that it would be attractive, that it would be diverse, it would have ways of involving different parts of the European population, that it would be genuinely transnational, a whole series of principles. And I mean, one could say that some of those principles have been respected in the final setup of the conference and others haven't. I think that our main criticism would really be that it was a very closed conversation in deciding how the Conference on the Future of Europe should work. It didn't involve civil society. It didn't really involve cities and regions and towns, who I think are very much shut out of the process of putting this together. And it became a kind of political squabble between different personalities. Now, are we surprised about that? Not at all. And the point of Citizens Take Over Europe is that, of course, genuine citizen participation is also a matter of struggle. There are some governments in Europe which would like to have no genuine citizen participation whatsoever. There are some governments in Europe which are as close as you can be to being autocratic governments as you can get. So, of course, it's no surprise that the conference altogether has some parts which are positive, some parts which are not. So I think we have to have realistic expectations about that, but we have to. But political realism means that we as civil society and citizens need to mobilize and struggle for what we really believe in. That's the reason why Citizens Takeover is organizing, in addition to engaging with the Conference on the Future of Europe. We've been talking to the Secretariat, we've been talking to the Executive Board and so on, and trying to shape the official process. We're organizing an independent process we call Assemblies of Solidarity. And since the nature of the discussion here, I want to mention we're doing that with local authorities. In October 22nd, 23rd, we will have in Palermo a transnational citizens assembly at the same time as the global summit of mayors, which is happening in Palermo at the same time, precisely to bring together citizens from throughout Europe and mayors who will actually come from around the world. And we will come up with our own priorities, and we'll be able to compare those with what's being discussed in the official conference. And likewise, I really want to support what Wilma was saying about best practice. You know, just on Friday and Saturday, we gathered 40 mayors in Palermo again with migrant rescue boats to call for a different migration policy for Europe, on the basis that many of these cities are already implementing a different migration policy for Europe. So there's best practices coming from a local level that we have to force into this Conference on the Future of Europe, again, without being naive. It's not all about the local level. You know, we can't do everything as civil society or as local representatives. It also requires national governments and the European institutions, but we need to be clear about the political dividing lines that are there, and in a certain sense who our enemies are. So Citizens Take Over Europe is a call both for engagement and also political realism.
Thank you so much for that, because you touch upon two issues that are very much relevant to this conversation. One is indeed that in a way we all were And then not surprised, but a little bit annoyed by the fact that we put together a conference on the future of Europe and we end up having the same fight between the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission about who is going to chair it and who is going to do what. So I was wondering, how do you ensure, how are you going to work to make sure that civil society organizations, but also, as you were saying, local governments and so on, are actually now involved in the process once the conference is already settled and considering the structure. So within that setting that you have, aside from the work that you're doing in parallel, how are you going to make sure that you have a voice in that conference?
Well, in all the same ways that we would engage in any kind of political process. So there's a plenary of the Conference on the Future of Europe, which has various representatives in it. There's a mix of politicians, civil society organizations, people from the Committee of Regions and so on. And one can lobby them, invite them, try to ensure that they're relaying messages that we would support. There is showing what quality citizen participation really looks like. You know, I'm very hopeful that the citizens panels that are being organized as part of the Conference on the Future of Europe officially are going to be the precursors of a more permanent form of citizen implication in the European Union. Indeed, I think that the Parliament in Strasbourg should be given to the citizens as a citizens' assembly. But you know, I suspect there's going to be various shortcomings with it. I already see some shortcomings with it. The lack of diversity in the participants, for example, is highly unlikely there's going to be Roma or people with disabilities or so on picked, because this is not the way that the panels are being put together. So we can show that there's alternative ways of doing this, and try and promote a kind of learning through this experience on the Conference on the Future of Europe. I think, in a way, that's the most important thing. This is an experiment, which we need to treat all of us as an experiment. But the important thing with experiments is that you can learn the lessons from them afterwards. And hopefully you can learn the lessons quicker than, for example, the European institutions learned the lessons of the financial crisis. It took them several years. But maybe this is slightly less you know, tangled up, and learning about how citizens' participation can happen very quickly. And I also see that actually as an advantage of the conference being so short. Everybody said, oh, it's only a year. Okay, it's only a year, but it's the first experiment of a year. Then we can do it again and we do it better.
I think that that's a really good point. Like, maybe the Conference on the Future of Europe, the actual result of it is actually that we make sure that active participative democracy of citizens is not only a one-time thing, it's actually something that is more permanent. And about that, I wanted to ask the three of you, because something that you have been also mentioning, the three of you, is the fact that, you know, sometimes we have to break that bubble. We have to go beyond the circles that we're also used to. Here in Brussels, we're so used to talk about European affairs, but this actually is affecting regular people in every corner of Europe. And I was wondering, how do you think that we can make sure that all those regular citizens are not necessarily very acquainted with the European politics, are actually aware of the Conference on the Future of Europe? They have a say, as you were mentioning, Nicolo, there are a lot of minorities that might not be engaging in this process, but that they're going to be very much affected by European politics. So how do you preach beyond the tour? How do you do it? Maybe Vilma, you would like to start? Yeah,
it's very difficult, but I think we have to use examples which are already improved. So, and I believe, thank you, Nicolo, for your introduction and for your words, but I believe that civil society has an important role to play when it comes to signaling developments and activating citizens to tackle important issues. So we have to use Europe in our local policy, because a lot of local policy and legislation is already based on the European legislation. So I would also like to share something about the way we interact with communities in my municipality at the local level. I think the local level is the start for a discussion, a European discussion with our citizens. And we have called this self-management, and it assumes that the communities, in other words, the inhabitants themselves, can very well shape their living environment themselves. They know what their needs are, what they want, how they want to live together. And because they live and work there, they feel responsible and want to invest in their living environment in a positive way. And with this way of working with communities, we as local government and the communities are partners with each other. No enemies, but partners. We are on an equal footing, and for every challenge that has to do with the development of villages in our municipalities, we look at who is up to, the village community or we, the municipality. And when is the community turns, our role is one of watching in the sidelines, of facilitating when asked by the community. And this way, quite a number of projects have already been realized in the villages in the municipality of Pelamaas, which have been successfully completed by the communities themselves, with or without facilitation by the municipality. We don't need other institutions, but we are working on European legislation. But I'm really proud about that the people feel it's our own environment, and we know what we need here in this region. So I think it's a small example. What can we roll in other countries? Because we all have citizens. They are not the same, but I think their thoughts are the same. How can I live in my environment? What is my role in this? And I think we often forget that. And Den Haag often forgets that we have all citizens and that we are citizens.
Indeed, and that's why it's so important that we have local representatives that engage with those citizens at local level and make sure that they raise awareness about the need to be engaging in this process. How do you see this question about going beyond the bubble and touching all kinds of citizens across Europe, Alvaro?
Yeah, I think Vilma made an excellent point, and I think that the idea that citizens are already playing a very important role in their own communities, and I think that the key here is precisely to bring those citizens that care about their communities to realize that the well-being of their community is also linked to the well-being of other communities. And I think that is how I think things should evolve. So one thing that I would certainly suggest, and I think Nicolo in his report, The Rise of Insurgent Europeanism, points out quite well, is that historically there has been a quite split situation in civil society, whereas some European level civil society organizations are based in Brussels, are very professionalized, with high level of studies, and that in some ways live in the bubble that you're describing, Beatriz. And the question is precisely how can we link those organizations to the communities that Vilma is talking about, and in some ways link the policy issues, the questions that are being discussed in local and national politics to the European ones in such a way that we bridge and we bring together the different levels of policy making in a way that they can see that is complementary, that the things that are being discussed are very similar and that they would benefit from working together.
That would definitely improve Europeanism across the European Union. Nicolo, actually, Alvaro was mentioning your book on this question as well. How do you see these trying to reach out to the citizens, in particular in the context of the Conference of the Future of Europe?
So I very much agree with what's already been said. I think that it's vital to go to where the citizens are, and that's where they live in their local communities and so on. So with Citizens Takeover, we're organizing our Assemblies of Solidarity right across the continent. And, you know, it's a perfect time to do it. In most countries, things are getting more relaxed in terms of the restrictions. People are desperate to meet and talk with other people. And so, you know, we've had some beautiful conversations from Sweden to Estonia to the south of Spain, where people are thrilled to come back together again and to talk about, you know, how the world has changed, what Europe can do about it, and the different issues they care about. So being active across the territory where the citizens are. Secondly, I want to say that, you know, we have to, and I think that's still a bit of a fault in the European institutions. We have to appreciate that people can have very legitimate reasons for being angry with either the European Union or their national politics or their life situation. And although they might express themselves in ways that seem very Eurosceptic and so on, that may not be the basis of the problem. The problem might be a real frustration about some quite legitimate injustices. And so I think going and listening about, first of all, to what people have to say, and trying to engage on a conversation about what are the real problems without immediately kind of being defensive, which is what the European institutions continually try to do. They're always on this kind of like defense as if they're being surrounded by Eurosceptics. But you need to level with the citizens. And I think once you do, and maybe that's something that's too difficult for politicians to do, I don't know. So maybe that's a role for civil society. But I feel like it really is something that civil society can do, because we don't have to ask for votes afterwards. We can go and listen to the problems and try and have a conversation about how things could be changed. And if you want them to change, you need to engage in this way or this way. This is something much bigger than the Conference on the Future of Europe, of course. It's about political education and the way that politics works, but the Conference on the Future of Europe is as good an occasion as any to get some more people to realize that, you know, injustice and frustration doesn't have to lead to alienation and hopelessness. It can lead to engagement and participation, even, you know, if you think it's unlikely that things change very soon. It's still better to engage than to sit there hopeless.
It's a much more constructive approach. What you were saying right now made me think about something that you mentioned before, and is this question also about being aware of the different competencies that local governments, regional governments, national governments, and European institutions have in all these daily problems that people are facing. Do you think this might be a challenge as well for the Conference on the Future of Europe? Because, you know, the different competencies of different governments might actually confuse a little bit sometimes the citizens who are not so much aware of who is responsible for what, who they be angry to.
You know, if I may, this is something which I think is important about the conference we have to insist on. There's been this great discussion about the governance and who's involved and so on. And this is a mess, I'm afraid, but it has one big advantage. All three institutions are there co-chairing this conference. And I've already heard people from the Commission and the Parliament say that means that we can't replace citizens, we don't have any competencies, because someone will have competencies, whether it's the Parliament, the Commission, the Council, and everything the Council represents. So we should insist, okay, then you can't say, well, this is not our problem, it's not inside the treaties, or, you know, the Charter of Fundamental Rights only applies to European legislation and so on. No, you're all there. There's also national parliamentarians inside the plenary. There's also local parliamentarians. So this time, no escape. I think we have to insist on this.
It's actually a really good point I've never thought about, but it's definitely important to know that everyone is involved, so therefore someone is going to have the responsibility to make sure that that's translated into concrete action. Alvaro, one of the questions that Nicola mentioned before as well, and that I was wondering what's your view on, is the fact that you know, the national governments are also going to play a role, and some national governments across the European Union are therefore more autocratic than others, and they are not only not taking into consideration civil society, but also alienating civil society, attacking civil society. So how do you see these different roles that the national governments are going to play in the Conference on the Future of Europe, and to what extent do you think it could undermine the process?
Well, I think that some national governments have already tried to undermine the process by signing a letter saying that, well, whatever happens, no treaty change should be possible. So I think there's clearly already a power struggle going on that started long ago, in which most governments are reluctant to any possible change, because any possible change will most likely lead towards less competences for the Council and potentially more competences for other bodies, potentially the European Parliament, that clearly goes against their own power situation in the European Union. So I am quite worried about the role of national governments. I am afraid that they have already tried to undermine the conference from the beginning. I mean, not all of them, but clearly some of them. However, at the same time, I'm also quite optimistic in some ways because of the activism that some even autocratic governments, including, for example, Orban and Hungary, are also taking a proactive approach in the Conference on the Future of Europe. So my sense is that even those national governments that might oppose any treaty change and that will be arguing in favor of, you know, less Europe and you know, just purely intergovernmental bargain and so on, are in any case engaging with the conversation, which anyways I think it's a good thing. I mean, I don't think that the fact that some actors are against integration should prevent them from participating. So I think even, let's say, Eurosceptic participation is still participation, so it might still encourage further participation. So I'm cautiously optimistic about the conference. I think that most national governments will play a role that is not necessarily positive in some ways, but I hope that also triggers a reaction on the side of civil society and local and regional authorities, precisely to engage and push back again and saying, well, actually European integration should be more than a bunch of national government representatives bargaining with each other.
Absolutely, and they are already represented at the European Council, so definitely having a push from the civil society and the citizens themselves is going to put more pressure on them to make sure that they translate the results of the Conference on the Future of Europe into actual action. I wanted to turn to Wilma because actually we were talking about the role of national governments, and the Netherlands is quite skeptical about the role of the Conference on the Future of Europe. So I was wondering, how do you see your interaction with your national government when it comes to making sure that your citizens are represented in the conference?
Well, as I already said, I think there is a lot of work to do, and yeah, we have to find each other and look what are the items we want to bring in the discussion, what items are addressed by our citizens, and that's difficult not only for the Netherlands, but I think for all the countries. But I want to add a small topic, if you don't mind. And that's another difficulty. And I want in that way recommend the report on developing urban and rural interplay, in which I was rapporteur together with my colleague from Serbia, Mr. Kovac. And from my opinion, it's clear that the interdependence between urban and rural areas and the suburban areas connecting them also need more of our attention. There are a lot of differences and there are a lot of bridges we have to close. And it's from my point of view very important to link this to the international discussion about the future of Europe. And there is also a big gap between the input of the representatives from the urban and the rural policymakers and politicians. But we all together are Europe. So there are also a lot of difference between the policymakers from the rural urban and the rural areas and the urban areas. So I think it's very difficult, but we need to take that also with us in the discussion. And I talk about that in the Hague about this theme. So I hope we can get it on the agenda.
Thank you so much for that, Vima, indeed, because I think it's definitely a very important issue that we haven't discussed, but it's going to be key also for the Conference on the Future of Europe. Yesterday, we saw the Commission putting together already a proposal to tackle those problems on the rural areas of the European Union, the question of the population, and so on and so forth. And this is going to be definitely a key issue for European politics in the coming years. I'd like to introduce now our next speaker, who is going to join this conversation with the presentation, but also engaging with our speakers, and that's Wolfgang Bethel, who is the Deputy Director for Communications at the Committee of the Regions. He previously worked for 10 years for the European Commission's Regional Policy and Employment and Social Affairs Director Generals, and has published several books and articles on EU cohesion policy and lectured part-time at the universities of Bremen and Osnabrück. So Wolfgang, you have the floor.
Ja, bedankt voor de uitnodiging en bedankt ook voor de organisatie van deze heel goede conferentie. Ik denk het is een heel goed example for how to do it. Maar as you said, I am working in communication, which the main purpose of which is to make things easier and understandable. And this is already, as we have heard from the previous speakers, quite a challenge. I have indeed a couple of slides. I wonder whether people can see them. And it's a longer presentation, and I have to admit that I update it on a daily basis. But I would like to focus on some images that try to make the whole exercise understandable for everybody. So if the colleagues could maybe move to slide number 4. I will speak for 10 minutes, but I'm also happy to answer any questions. And the purpose obviously is to explain what the conference is about and how the committee will influence it, what will try to influence it. And we have already heard from Ms. Wilma Delissen how this will be done. So the first thing is to understand that indeed we have a 2-column structure. You see this parliamentary image here, which was composed based on a decision taken by the executive board of the conference plenary. The whole thing was in the media and I think rightly so, already criticized before it was given birth for its complexity. The reason being obviously that the main idea, having one personality leading the whole process, was not quite agreeable between the three institutions involved, the Parliament, the Council of the EU, and the European Commission. So what happens usually when there cannot be one president in Brussels, there will be several. So there are indeed three presidents, and they agreed upon this structure. And you can see on the left side that half of this conference plenary, which is the crucial body deciding on the final report, is made up by elected politicians, so members of the Parliament and members of the European Parliament, of national parliaments in equal numbers. An equal number also on the right side are the citizens. So there are indeed 108 citizens if you count citizens from the so-called European panels. I come to that in a minute. Citizens of the national panels, and one representative of the European Youth Forum, actually the president, Ms. Makula. And these people are negotiating together with government representatives and representatives of the advisory bodies to the EU and social partner and civil society organizations in lower numbers about the final report. This will happen, I believe, in January, February next year. And before that, if you could move to slide number 6, please. That is 2 more from here. Exactly. So here you have how the European citizens panels will be composed. You would be able to count, if you had more time, 27 colors, meaning that from all EU member states, which was also for a certain moment an issue, why not all, the conference is not called the Conference of the European Union, but the Conference of Europe, why not also inviting citizens from, for example, accession countries, was not agreed upon. And what's important news for Maastricht, the city of the treaties and the famous city, is that yes, the European Citizens Panel, one of them, will be held in Maastricht. And that is news, I believe. It's not yet hammered into stone, like all these processes in Europe, you know, before someone has not signed a decision, it can't be published, but it's pretty sure. I know from the internal sources, so we talk, communicators talk to each other. That's sometimes a difference with other people. So we know that there will be one event in Maastricht. It's not yet clear when, but it's an important event, like the events in the other 3 cities. Why? Because at that occasion, either in December or January, the citizens panels will vote on their recommendations to the conference plenary that you have seen before. So the whole process is, if you want bottom up, citizens say, as they say in many other places, what they want. Then it's checked against delivery to say so as regards the legal framing and the legal possibilities. And then the conference plenary, so the elected politicians will say, we put this into the final report, or if they don't put it into the final report, they have to reason why they don't do it. So the other cities are Florence, Dublin, and Strasbourg, and also Natolin is one of the cities. Natolin is a district in Warsaw. And the abbreviations behind EUI means European University Institute. Dublin, it's the International Institute for European Affairs. And in Maastricht, it's the university, I believe, together with the European Institute for Public Administration. So this is news. Don't talk about it, because first of all, Mr. Verhofstadt needs to sign the decision, and then you will soon, I believe still in July, know the date. And then we hope that we together can make some sense out of it. Could you move on to one of the next slides? I'm coming to the end, because now I want to speak a little bit. Yep, maybe one more. Please, next one. Next one. I don't want to confuse you. You get this invitation, you get this presentation afterwards. Yep, exactly. This is the one. Now, this is an attempt to explain to you how your event today, your recommendations today, but also other events held locally can influence the process. So you see, if you want the kind of ladder of decisions, starting from the lower left side of the slide to the upper right side, where you see the report I talked about. We believe that the report will be adopted by the 3 presidents. So Mr. Sassoli from the European Parliament, Ms. von der Leyen from the Commission, and Mr. Macron, the President of the Council, early spring. They will be adopted in April. And now, today we are in Maastricht. You hold a local citizens panel. You will vote, I believe, on recommendations, ideas. And then it's important that these ideas, the recommendations, a report from the event is uploaded to the digital platform. The digital platform for the conference is a platform that was adapted from an existing platform to collect ideas from the ground. So from 450 million citizens, from organizations, from institutions. So it's important that somebody in Maastricht pushes the button once you have agreed on the report and uploads your recommendations and ideas to this platform. What will happen with them? Artificial intelligence will crawl through the ideas and recommendations in September and November. There will be 2 reports from the platform telling everybody, those were the ideas. People want chocolate ice every Saturday morning for free, for example, which would be a stupid idea. And they will be clustered along topics like people say on climate change this, they say on other things that. And then experts from all the institutions will read these ideas and tell the politicians, possible, not possible. Possible within the treaty, possible only with a change of the treaties, and so on and so on. So that everybody, and this will be all transparent, all uploaded to the platform again, will have the possibility to understand. So your ideas will be, creamed, they will be presented, they will be given to the European citizens panels, and then you see the citizens, the European citizens panels, these 4 times 200 citizens, they decide on certain topics about their recommendations, and they give this to the plenary session, who will decide finally on a report and a follow-up whether or not the treaties will be changed. I don't believe that this will be the result. I'm rather skeptical here because the moment isn't there, but it's not excluded. Nothing is excluded, and that is why it is quite an open process. It's a process, and that is my final word, which combines, and that's quite unique also, I would say, representative democracy from different levels, Committee of the Regions, local level, civil society organizations, citizens, national and European elected politicians from parliaments, together with participatory democracy, with a bottom-up process. And I would underline what someone has said before, it's an experiment. Experiments can go wrong. Sometimes it's even good when they fail, because most of the people learn throughout their lives from mistakes they made or from, failures. I'm not hoping that it will go wrong, but I'm also realistic enough to say that, the media, for example, they aren't quite positive for the time being. Understandably, media always look for scandals, but I think we need a more positive spirit in all of this and more hope, and also, how can I say, the readiness to understand that all the people involved, all the organizations involved are in this experiment together. It's a learning process, and I hope that the outcome will be positive in the end. And that's why I also clicked optimistic when the question was asked before. Thanks for listening, and I'm happy to answer questions should there be some. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Wolfgang. I was wondering if you have a reaction towards what our speakers have been saying over the past hour about the role of the different actors in the Conference on the Future of Europe from your perspective of the European Committee of the Regions.
Yeah, I mean, I was nodding a lot because I understand so well the different positions. For example, when one thinks about a municipality, community, a town or a city where, people are involved in local politics already. And there are many places, I can tell you, where citizens are taken on board when politicians make decisions. It's not kind of unique. The European Union, to say so, has not invented participatory democracy. I mean, if you go back to Athens 2,000-3,000 years ago, you had such models already in play, though only for certain people. And that was the wrong thing there. My key point is that indeed, as Ms. Denison van Dongelo has said, it is not guaranteed that the voice of regions and cities is heard. So from the 433 delegates to the plenary, there are 18 from the Committee of the Regions. There are more local actors in the other delegations, we know that, but it's a small fraction and we had to fight for it because initially we were only offered 4 seats. So our president said, we want 108. And then we ended up with 18. So this is how it works. And I mean, understandably, because the COR is not the center of power in the Brussels bubble, to say. So it's an advisory body, which means that it gives advice which will be taken into account or not. But as Ms. Dellison Tongalo has said, Europe matters in all the places that make up the European Union. It's law, it's funding, it's pandemics, unfortunately, it's crisis that don't, it's climate, and these issues don't know borders, you know? I mean, they're happening everywhere, they're happening across borders. And so I do think that not only the conference, the whole European integration is a big experiment. And we need to understand that going alone on our own is not the solution for the biggest problems and challenges that we have ahead of us. So it needs to be put on the table that working together is an added value in itself. And of course, then we start entering into the details. And that is something where I can understand that many citizens kind of switch off quickly because it's so complex. Yeah, it is complex. But what is the alternative? Is the alternative to have borders again, like we had in the Middle Ages, where we had not only 27, but I don't know how many, like the 3-digit number. I mean, many countries that say that are now proud to be nation state didn't exist anymore, including the country I was born in. I do think we have to look forward and think about maybe something like a European Republic, where you still, where, you know, citizenship is unique and one, and where people do not only have the right to go to a conference, but where they have drawing rights, for example, from social politics, where there are really European citizens in the meaning of it, meaning that there's a feeding mother called Europe that is their country, and that they vote. When they go voting, they know exactly what the options are, because it will be decided by this republic. This doesn't mean that, you know, countries like the proud Netherlands or others would vanish. That is not the necessary consequence of it. But I would think that more integration for the better of the planet and the continent and the people is definitely something we should aim at. And yeah, you will have your ideas today. We look forward to it.
Absolutely. And we have seen the alternative to that integration, and it doesn't look good indeed. We're going to go back now to the questions that our audience has been shared with us over the past hour. We are running out of time, and I'm trying to bring a few of those questions to make sure that we answer some of them. The first one and the most voted one is, how can you bridge the divide between the rise of populism in national politics and the drive for more citizens' engagement on EU level? And I was wondering, maybe Nicola, you would like to jump on this one?
Well, I think one thing we shouldn't do is adopt populist strategies at the European level. And there's a bit of a danger of that. I see that one potential danger with this conference on the future of Europe is to say, well, we've consulted the citizens and, you know, they agree with us. This is a kind of populist manipulation. We need to be clear that this is not possible. Democracy is also about divergences. It's also about the people not being totally unified. It's a political democracy is based on political division, and so we need to insist on that. And that is the opposite message to populism. Secondly, I think that we need to show, as has been said several times, not only the benefits of cooperation across borders, and of course there are many benefits, but also the human virtue of it, I dare say. That it's a lot more pleasant to be cooperative and helpful than it is to be engaging in kind of shouting matches and forms of abuse, you know. And I think that this human dimension can get a little bit lost in the institutional sphere, shall we say. You know, and we really need to be able to show that, you know, Europe is also about friendship, camaraderie, and working together. And who wouldn't prefer to have such a life than a life in which you are, you know, dividing up into groups and hurling insults at one another? So I think this is also important. It's about the ethos of the Conference on the Future of Europe and the way we engage in it, to use a Greek term.
Indeed, very important. And to approach this issue, as you were saying before, even it's not about being skeptical, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a negative approach. You can actually engage to make sure that you do things better. There are a lot of questions coming from the audience about the role of academia, Alvaro. They wonder, what do you think should be the role of researchers in the Conference on the Future of Europe, but also how can you make sure that you contribute to ensuring the engagement of citizens in these kind of participative democracy initiatives?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, historically, European studies scholars have been doing a lot of work that is not only empirical, not only conceptual, but also highly normative. And I think it remains important to continue doing research that points out the democratic flaws of the European Union and the democratic opportunities that it might offer, especially in the context of the Conference on the Future of Europe. So I think that there is an opening for academics to be involved precisely in for instance, contributing to the design of the citizen panels. Well, if there is a citizen panel in EUI or in Maastricht, it would be great if researchers can also be involved. That we have done some work on participatory democracy, and we have studied previous experiences. So I think that there is something meaningful that we can be useful with. We can also contribute to generally public debate. I am myself involved in several initiatives to discuss current affairs as well, introducing a dimension of academia and research. So I think that there's many ways, and I think that the Conference on the Future of Europe offers an excellent opportunity to build on that.
Later more on that, but I have another question. This one maybe for Wolfgang, considering the presentation that he made before. So healthy expectations management will be vital, and as well as adequate follow-up. So what do you feel should be the case steps for the European Commission and the European Parliament to take after the Conference on the Future of Europe?
Yeah, I would just want to say something on the involvement, if you allow, of academia and other experts. The European Citizens Panels, like any other citizens panel, should be understood as an exercise in itself. It's quite complex to bring 200 citizens which speak 24 or even more languages together and to tell them over a weekend you need to discuss the European perspective on climate change and the environment. So these people are left alone. They are in the hands of experts who know how to moderate such processes. They will be divided in smaller groups, and you know, they will be listened to. They will be not talked at. Our politicians, for example, in the Committee of the Regions, many of them have not yet understood this. And I even believe in the European Parliament that is sometimes the case. You hear sometimes arguments, yeah, but why the citizens? They are not elected. I am elected. So, or do they know enough about this or that topic? Have they read the treaties on the European Union? No, they are just ordinary citizens. They are even not experts for anything. They are just ordinary citizens. And the role of these panels is to give them the time to talk in their language, being interpreted in other languages, to other citizens and leave them alone. If Maastricht is happy to welcome them in the town hall, show the beauty and history of the city, and the mayor would address them, tell them, you know, it's very important what you're doing, that'll be it. They can ask experts if they don't know, but that is the limit. They, the citizens, decide whom they want to listen to. That's an important remark to make. Now, on the management of expectations, yeah, that's a word that usually is let's say has as a background, don't expect too much from all of this. I mean, what is clear, everything is transparent now. It's on the table. It can go wrong, but everybody who is in this process would be badly advised to work against the results of it. We know that in some countries, the expectations are very low, if not contradictory to, let's say, the expectations of the European Parliament. And that's the conflict that we are in. Is it more or is it less Europe that is the outcome of all of this? And this is a very broad, but also a very specific question. My expectations are high as regards the process. I think all the elements to make this a success are on the table. I don't exclude that we will have conflicts that go even, that will be sharp in their nature. But I mean, it's clear there will be a report, as I said, in April next year at the latest. And this report will pave the way towards the next steps to European integration. That's all what can be said at the time, for the time being. And I know that people in the call here and many other people are working hard to make this a success, including you guys there in Maastricht.
Thank you for that. We're running out of time, but very quickly, I'm going to ask all of you after what Wolfgang said about your expectations for the Conference on the Future of Europe. And I would like to start with Vilma, who was nodding very strongly to Wolfgang's statement. You hear me? Yeah, we can. Okay.
Sorry.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, I was saying that I want to close the session very quickly because we're running out of time, but I wanted to hear from all of the speakers after what Wolfgang said about his own expectations for the Conference on the Future of Europe. I want to hear yours as well. So Vilma, what is it that you're expecting from the Conference on the Future of Europe?
Well, I told already some things about the role of the citizens. How can we connect them to Europe? And I think the Corona crisis learned that Europe and crises are not a good team. So the measures taken during the crisis to limit people-to-people contacts have a major impact on border traffic. Border between member states have been closed. Border regions have sometimes been and the divergent measures enforced in different countries have not made it easy. So I think we can learn about that. And I think Europe in the heads of people is not the same as 3 years ago because of the crisis. So I think we have take advantage by this conference to learn how to reach our citizens. They are the base of this conference, I think, and not only the policymakers and not only the politicians, but the people.
Great opportunity indeed to make the best out of this crisis. Alvaro, very quickly, what are your expectations?
Well, I think the conference will be what we make it out to be. So we have to push, we have to organize civil society, academia, regional policymakers, national policymakers. We have to engage as much as possible, try to engage as many people as possible, and push for more European dimension in national and regional political debates.
Thank you so much for that. Nicolo, what are the expectations from the side of the civil society?
Well, I think that it's going to be a learning experience for everybody involved, and I'm hoping it's going to be an empowering experience for citizens and civil society, and perhaps a humbling experience for those kind of characters Wolfgang was talking about who want to come and lecture the citizens or the civil society about their own problems.
Wouldn't be bad, no? So thank you so much to all our speakers for this very insightful conversation that we've been having over the past hour.